How realistic is a so-called timeout from the Eurozone?
It's very realistic. I mean, I think it's still quite possible it's going to go that way eventually. I find it very hard to believe Greece will implement the reforms. I find it very hard to believe this government is competent enough to carry through on them. After the, jumping off a cliff last week with the no vote, really, in the end, if they go through with this program, they will have lied to their voters. Are they really going to be straight with the Europeans? It's hard to know. I mean, I think if the Europeans want to go ahead with this, they have to recognize that, there may be some window dressing, but the reforms won't happen. Greece will remain in a deep recession, and it is kicking the can down the road.
Right, but if that clause comes into play because they don't do it and there's no ESM, can you have a temporary Grexit? Or really, once you're out, you're gone?
No, absolutely it can be temporary, and I think that's in fact the right thing to do. Basically, you put up capital controls, create a soft Greek euro that's worth less than a euro outside of Greece. This has happened many times in many places, not in exactly within a currency union, but certainly countries that ostensibly link to the dollar, but it's worth less inside than outside. What makes it difficult is that it's chaotic. This wasn't planned. This is happening overnight. They haven't figured out how to implement it. As I said, they're not that good at implementation. But it certainly can work. It certainly can be durable for 5 years, 10 years. And it maintains the idea that once they meet conditions, they can come back. And I think that's very important for the Europeans. I think just, telling them goodbye would be a tragic mistake. But, giving them a timeout like this lets them decide how they want to proceed. How do they want to grow? How does Greece want to be a modern European state? And it really needs to decide this, Richard, for itself, how it wants to do it on its own. You cannot impose this kind of reform on the outside. You can't marry someone and say, here's a list of 100 ways I want you to change. If they don't change for reasons they want on their own, it's not going to work.
So I'm surprised to hear you sort of being, in many ways, Ken, optimistic or at least positive about the prospect of this temporary Grexit. Almost, and please tell me if I'm misinterpreting what you're saying, almost you're saying to us it is the preferred option.
Well, I would say, Richard, it's inevitable. Virtually, this happens eventually, the way things have been going. I really don't see how this latest bailout package does more than put things off till the fall, till the spring. And it's very unattractive, but, I mean, we've been going down this road for 5 years. It's not attractive to go through a divorce like this, which it is. But it's painful, but I think, that's where it's headed. No, I think it'll get worse before it gets better. But the Greek government should have taken the deal they were offered 2 weeks ago. We would be in a much better place. Greece would be in a much better place. The Syriza party, the economists who advised them to say no, really had them jump off a cliff.
Now, when you talk about those economists, you're talking about people like Joseph Stiglitz, Jeffrey Sachs, and Paul Krugman, those very well-known economists who came out firmly for a no vote. They're some of your esteemed colleagues in many ways.
Yeah, I think this was a very wrong call, that if a creditor's still giving you money, you take it. You renegotiate after they stop giving you money. The Europeans had caved in, really, and made a pretty generous offer, which would have continued to give Greece quite a bit of money for a while. Yes, they wanted them to pay later, but Greece could have opened up negotiations then. It would have been less chaotic.
Right.
Instead, he said no. The offer is gone. They have a less good deal now. The economy's in a worse place. And above all, as you said, Richard, there's no trust. The credibility of the Cyprus government is shot already with the creditors, I think soon with its voters.
But now, finally, just let's talk about the credibility of this lot, because Donald Tusk said tonight was the deadline. He was quite clear. If they are fudging that deadline or in some way going to such extreme efforts, Do you think the credibility of the Council, of the Eurozone, of the ministers themselves is now questionable too?
They've been pretty tough. I mean, as soon as the European Central Bank stopped financing capital flight from the Greek banks, and that's why the collapse happened. The money's racing out of Greece, but they need to get the euro from the European Central Bank. The second that stopped, Greece was under enormous pressure. And so they've certainly, you know, as long as they're holding the lid on that, there's not fresh euro going into Greece. If there's not a hard, you know, time deadline, it's pretty real. I don't think anyone's, you know, saying it has to be this minute. It clearly is a very pressing issue. The Greek economy is in free fall after this no vote, and they need to do something quickly going one way or the other. It sounds like there'll be a deal. Who knows? You're closer to it than I am, but I'm very skeptical that it will last long.